Perfect. Okay.
Thank you, Carly.
Yeah. So yeah, a bit about me. My name is Carly Hughes. I am a former special education teacher. I have background in applied behavior analysis. I worked as an RBT for a little bit before teaching, and while teaching, I taught at the elementary, middle, and high school level. I also gained my bachelor's degree in early childhood and my master's degree in applied behavior analysis and special education for students with severe and profound needs. But then most recently, I have kind of pivoted into more of the advocacy world to help support parents and school teams as we kind of navigate through the IEP process, which can be sometimes daunting, sometimes overwhelming. And so that's kind of our role now. So today we're going to kind of talk about, again, how to support our kiddos with some of those challenging behaviors. I think a lot of times people really go to those more ABA practices of that reinforcement and all those kind of things. And we'll talk about some of those things. We'll also kind of look into that emotional regulation piece, the whole child approach, and understanding what's called neuroception, because we're kind of learning more and more about how all these pieces really come together with behavior. And just reminding ourselves too that behavior is not synonymous with negative behavior or bad choices. Behavior is everything that we do. And so we'll be talking through some of those things today. Again, a big piece of what we're going to be talking about is those preventative and proactive strategies. We're going to talk about those in the moment tools and those long-term supports. And I know a lot of times we kind of hear like supporting challenging behavior, our minds go to in the moment when we're having hard times, what do we do? But really the emphasis is on those preventative and proactive kind of solutions and those long-term supports to help support your child or your learner in their in those challenging moments. So just to kind of help us reframe, we're going to start with some foundational understanding of, again, what is behavior? What does it look like? How do we tend to see it? And I think what's really important is to reframe that it's not something that our kids are just doing to gain our attention or to, they're trying to seek with negative intent or they're being manipulative or they just need to be more disciplined. I know a lot of times too, when we're parenting and we have our parents around, they will weigh in, and it's more of a traditional approach to think it just comes back to discipline. But again, really, it's more about that preventative and proactive approach and understanding that need for regulation, understanding what's happening inside our brains and bodies when we're having hard times, and how to support our kids in those moments with those type of, with that understanding. So again, that old view versus the new view. So out with the old, out with the idea that our child is being difficult or they just won't behave or they're just testing you or that they need the consequences. And now we're kind of looking at the child's having difficulty. They're not giving you a difficult time. They're having a hard time. They're trying to regulate. They have a hard time regulating. They're trying to communicate to you that they're in distress and they need support. They don't need a consequence. They need support. So obviously a little bit of background, we still are going to acknowledge the ideas and concepts of some ABA, applied behavior analysis principles. So looking at the functions of behavior with the escape, attention, access, and sensory. Knowing that sometimes we do things to avoid uncomfortable situations or demands. Sometimes we're seeking that connection or attention. Sometimes it's about accessing a desired item or activity, a tangible, and sometimes about meeting those internal sensory needs. And again, throughout this, we'll talk about that it's not always just as binary as these functions of behavior. There's also more things at play, like our emotions, our ability to be regulated, and safety, and how our brain and bodies are interpreting things in our environment as threats or security. A big piece of this is understanding that the nervous system is at play here. So again, knowing that when our children are kind of in that regulated state, they're ready to learn, they're content, they're playing very well, they're in that regulated state. And then they might kind of get bumped out of that state by different internal and external stimuli, and we might see that fight or flight, the freeze, and what does that look like? That could look like being agitated. You kind of notice the anxiety. Maybe your child will start to vocalize more. Maybe you see them pacing or trying to self-regulate with some more stimming activity and behaviors, or you start to see them kind of shut down, withdraw, disconnect, and freeze. Just a little bit about understanding what neuroception is. So again, that It was coined by Dr. Stephen Porges, and just kind of helps us understand that our body's always taking in information, and then it's deciding how do we react to those things. And that is developed over years of history reinforcement, those learned experiences, and those different things can be different triggers for different people. A big piece too is that role of sensory and sensory processing. So just a little note here that OTs are a great person to lean on when you're looking at your child's sensory profile, and we'll talk more about that, but kind of understanding, is your child more of that hypersensitive kid or a hyposensitive kid? And sometimes it can kind of go back and forth. Hypersensitivity is we're having an overwhelming response to sensory input. So we're seeing things like covering ears, avoiding being touched, distress in bright lights. And all of us have that sensory processing. All of us are sometimes more hypersensitive or hyposensitive to different things. I know a lot of times I see people relating to like walking into like a Walmart where the lights are really, really bright and you just hear everything and you get a headache or your eyes hurt or you just want to get out of there because there's a lot of people. So just kind of always kind of bringing this to the attention to ourselves when we're working with our children who are kind of struggling in the moment will be really important. Again, the hyposensitive piece is where we're kind of under responsive. So those are our sensory seekers. So they might be seeking that touch, the hug, the pressure. They like things loud. They like things stimulating. And again, there's different times that we may be seeking these different types of sensory input. Again, just a little graphic here to kind of show you kind of a visual. That hypersensitive, think of a regular sized cup and a drop of water that's super, super big, and it has a big impact. Whereas with hypo, we have the same size cup, but maybe that same drop is really, really small in our cup. And it just impacts the way we interpret that information differently. So again, a big piece we're going to talk about today is being proactive versus reactive. Again, we will talk about those in the moment strategies, and for Q&A, we can definitely talk through like if you have specifics of like what do I do when, but we're going to focus mostly too on the preventative piece. So now that we understand why, we're going to explore the how, and a couple big concepts here to take away is that predictability helps regulation. It's a trauma-informed approach. We know that our bodies and our minds love to know what's coming next. And so helping our kiddos by having these things in place will also help to decrease or mitigate those instances of those challenging behaviors or those challenging moments. So things like having a structured environment, thinking about the sensory needs, having a strong connection with your child and that growth and learning, and then developing some skills to kind of go in place of those challenging behaviors we're seeing. So with predictability, things like visual schedules, having consistent routines, having calendar systems, you can kind of, have somewhere in your house where you can kind of go to, again, like that's almost a routine where you're talking through your week, what's coming up as changes, some routines. It doesn't have to be very rigid. It doesn't have to be very elaborate. A routine can just be that we always put our shoes on before going outside. Visual schedules, again, this can look very different. It can be a very simple 3-step schedule. It can be a more elaborate 10-step schedule, depending on what your child might need throughout their day or those routines as well. And definitely pairing all of these supports together can be very beneficial. A big piece we see a lot is having that challenge during transitions. So making sure that before the transition happens, we're really trying to support our children. Things like previewing those changes. So letting them know you have 5 minutes to clean up, maybe using a visual timer so you don't have to verbally remind them, because sometimes too, it is important to note that whatever verbal reaction you give or verbal action you give is going to get a reaction sometimes. So if saying to your child you have 5 minutes is actually something that kind of triggers them and kind of puts them in that fight or flight of, oh no, I'm not done, I'm not ready to clean up, then you might just use the visual timers, which could be something on your phone. It could be a stand timer. It could be a little timer you have on your TV if you want to. It can be something you print out and are adding, to kind of do the countdown. It could be using their favorite character as a countdown. So really kind of supporting that concept of a change is coming. Using a transition object, right? And this could be something that is very consistent. So, using a comfort items they carry between transitions. So for example, if you have a hard time getting out from the house into the car in the mornings, you might have a transition transition object like a stuffed animal, a blanket, even just like their water bottle for older kids. And then using what's called behavioral momentum, where you have a more highly preferred task or a task they can do that then kind of leads into the next thing. And behavioral momentum is also a strategy you can use, like not only with transition, but with other types of activities and preventative strategies. So for example, you might use behavioral momentum when, again, same example, you want to get your kid out of the house. It's typically a hard time for them. So you might say something like, can you get me your water bottle? Or can you get mommy's water bottle? Making them be a helper to then move to the door. And then, can you open the door for me? Things we know they want to do. That language is different than it's time to go. We're kind of getting them moving in that transition. So again, also using visuals, and you can use as many visuals as you want, but just important to note we don't want to overwhelm. So we want to make sure that things are consistent, they're reliable, they are appropriate for your child. Things like first then boards, choice boards, social stories are very effective. Again, this can be as elaborate or as simple as you think it needs to be for your child. It can be pictures of your child doing these things. It can be pictures of a favorite character doing these things. It can be pictures you print offline that are, the stock photos, or animated pictures and graphics. I think also Ramsey and I were going to share out after this session some of those tools. Ramsey?
Yes, I just took myself off mute to say I'm going to put that in the chat right now. If there's anyone who logged on today, this first one, the first then board, I have made and laminated a few of these, and I'd be happy to, the form just tells you to give your child's name and school name and teacher name, and I will inter-office mail it to them, and then it can go home in your child's book bag if you would like a first then board.
Perfect. And again, reminding you that you can use these things in tandem, right? So you might have a choice board that then translates to being a first then. So they have the choice of the different activities they're able to choose from, or the different meals for breakfast. Again, making sure that we give autonomy is also a really great tool for supporting behaviors and supporting challenging moments when kiddos feel like they are in charge. Oh, yes, middle schoolers, high schoolers, these strategies absolutely work for all ages. Again, making sure that you kind of just cater it to the cognitive level of your child. Visually, it might be simpler for our younger kiddos. It might be more complex for older kiddos. It might be digital for some kids. It might be printed. There's a lot of ways to adapt these. And as Ramsey said, she has a first then board to provide. I can also share with Ramsey some different kind of differentiated versions of these things that are kind of ready to go. So if you need to you print them out, laminate them, cut them up, or keep it on your computer, iPad, whatever, to help support your child. Oops. So again, thinking about those simple daily visuals and routines, making sure that, again, we keep it kind of as consistent as possible. But part of this is also knowing that there are changes. So we're also going to get to that of how do we teach flexibility? What do we do to support the child when we're asking them to be flexible, when flexibility is a really hard kind of concept? But keeping that routine as consistent as possible, as simple as possible. But again, knowing your child, it can be more elaborate or it can be really super simple. Thinking about those sensory accommodations we talked about earlier. So I know a lot of our thoughts go like that noise management, using those headphones that limit or reduce auditory overload. There's also things like the loops that are really great, people love, that kind of go into the ear. There's the over-ear headphones. Thinking about movement breaks, making sure that this is just helping that our kiddos regulate their nervous system. It's hard to sit still for a long time, so allowing them the opportunities to be physical and be moving, and kind of also giving them what their body needs. And sometimes, again, our kiddos don't know that. So our kiddos might be kind of stagnant for a little bit, and making sure that we as the adults are incorporating times in their day to get up and move and give their body what they need, because sometimes they might not know that. And so then we're seeing this kind of buildup of tension or buildup of, again, that sensory need, and that they need to get and seek some sensory input, but they don't know that, so they just start to get fidgety. Again, to fidgets, having those sensory tools when needed. So there's all different types out there. And there's all different kind of ways to support what sensory tools are. Sometimes it's just very hands-on. We go to things like the stress balls, the poppets, the spinners, all that kind of stuff. But sometimes sensory tools can also be like those heavy blankets, or just this heavy stuffed animal sitting across their lap. Things like that. And then again, the clothing consideration. I know a lot of parents are familiar with our kiddos and what they like and don't like. And sometimes, that tag on a certain shirt is not going to fly, or like the Under Armour material. A lot of kiddos don't like that, or sometimes they prefer the Under Armour material over like cotton. And so just making sure that that's something we kind of consider when we're thinking about, oh, something's happening today and we're having a really rough day. And you might be like, oh, it was a tag on the back of their shirt. Another key concept here for that proactive and preventative supports is really building our kids' emotional vocabulary, helping them identify how they're feeling so that they can communicate this in any way that their communication supports. So kind of teaching what those zones of regulation are, which is that color-coded system, blue, red, yellow, green. There's a lot of visuals out there that are also tied to very preferred characters, using feeling charts, using emotional thermometers. And a big piece here too is also that we are modeling, and we are showing parents or showing our kids as a parent or caregiver how to like recognize that, oh, I'm getting really worked up. I need to take a second. And again, kind of not, when we do this, our kids can understand more than we think they can. So, don't feel like, oh, my child wouldn't understand their grasp this concept. They will. And especially if you pair it with visuals, if you use it consistently, if you're modeling it, the language is similar, they will start to kind of pick this up. And this is something too that when we talk about later, you can incorporate into school as well. And a lot of school teams are incorporating this with the social emotional learning and teaching our kiddos how to understand what they're feeling, how their feelings are tied to, some bodily sensations. Like I might get really hot if I'm super anxious or mad, or my heart's beating really fast because I'm nervous, or all kinds of different things like that. So a big piece here too we want to talk about is the teaching the replacement skills. So it's important to highlight that teaching the replacement skills, and we'll talk about this too later on, is that this has to happen when we're in that calm, regulated state. A lot of times we think, oh my gosh, my child is hitting, so I am going to teach them in that moment not to hit, but really we're doing that beforehand. And we might still see instances of hitting, but we're always modeling that break card, or we're modeling how to tap me on the shoulder to get my attention when they are in those more calm, ready to learn states of regulation. Also making sure that we are supporting communication in any means that our child uses to communicate to us what they need in the moment, using that total communication, whether it is an AAC device, picture cards, visuals, sign language, mouth words, whatever it's going to be for your child, making sure we're always, again, modeling, reinforcing, and teaching those skills and giving them the language to use in those moments that they are struggling. We touched on modeling earlier with the emotional vocabulary, but it's also really important to model those coping strategies. So again, narrating how you're feeling, narrating what you're going to be doing to kind of regulate, practicing with your child. And I know it sounds crazy because who has the time in our day, but just kind of devoting a moment, whether it's you're doing bedtime and you're practicing deep breaths, or you are, in the kitchen and, helping with dinner or something, just trying to find times to bring this into your day. Because again, we learn better when we're in that ready to learn brain state, when we're not perceiving threats, we're calm, we are able to focus, using things like visual reminders, and of course, celebrating and reinforcing that your child was able to do these things. Some other ideas are things like role playing those different scenarios. This is a common thing we also see in the school setting with kids with IEPs. We tend to see the role playing. We want to make it playful, so turning things into games. Sometimes using this video modeling. So there's tons of things on YouTube out there. Obviously, just be the parent that is mindful of what you're looking at. But there's so many things on YouTube, but there are a lot of really great videos that you can kind of look up coping skills or different things that are tied to these concepts. And then also involving the family and siblings into practicing these things, modeling, and doing it with your children. Now we're going to talk about what to do when those behaviors do happen. Again, this is going to seem kind of repetitive because it almost is just a formula that we're going to be using when you're having challenging behaviors, knowing that most of the teaching and behavior modification that we're looking for is going to happen before and after long term, not necessarily in the moment. So as the person that is helping support your child, you're going to pause and make sure you kind of take in a moment what's happening. Again, like assessing, is it sensory? Is something going on? Are they perceiving information? Did I say something? Kind of trying to understand first what's happening, making sure that you are regulated. We're going to come in, we're trying to connect with the child, and then we're going to offer that support. Again, too, keeping in mind that this is not defiance. They're showing us they're in distress. So you might be asking why, and if your child is not able to verbalize why, that's just more of like, we're kind of thinking like, why is this happening? We're trying to seek to understand, right? Because remember that behavior is telling us something, it's a message. We're leading with empathy. We're trying to connect before we correct, and then we're trying to solve that problem. Big piece again, reiterating that the co-regulation before self-regulation. So our kiddos are going to need us to help them co-regulate and help them model that before we're expecting them to self-regulate on their own. But knowing that it's kind of contagious, right? Common illnesses are contagious. So are other things like anxiety. So if we are showing that we're regulated, that is going to have an impact on our children. So things like taking those deep belly breathing, counting to 10, feeling your feet on the floor, using calm phrases. Again, it might seem really silly, but this is a really important piece when we are dealing with challenging behavior in the moment. So earlier we talked about those brain states a little bit, and it's really important to understand that because when we target the behavior in the moment and that's challenging, we want to kind of think back to like, where's this coming from, right? If we're seeing that we're having a kind of a bigger meltdown or bigger aggression or bigger, more disruptive behaviors, our child's probably operating from that survival brain state, which is that lower part of our brain. They are looking for safety. Their brain is just kind of in that fight or flight. So really we have to maintain the safety for our child. We're reducing demands and we're trying to meet them where they're at to kind of get them to move back to that thinking brain where they can then kind of understand what we're telling them to do, redirect them, and so on. So really, we'll talk through again that our response to the behavior is going to differ based on kind of where our child is in that moment in their brain state. So with the survival brain, safety is first. We're reducing demands. We don't want to overload with a ton of things like, I told you to calm down, I need you to stop talking, or, I told you to get your backpack, go get your backpack. We're just kind of reducing all of those things. Right now is not the time to give demands and expect our child to follow those things. We're just going to use short, simple phrases. We might even be silent in this moment. As a teacher, one of the trainings we got was in that crisis response. And one of the strategies that I often used was the WAIT strategy. And it stands for why am I talking? And so because when we are in that brain state and we are really kind of dysregulated, we are stressed, our body's not interpreting language the same way our brain's not interpreting language. So it's kind of like at that point, there's not a lot to say. It's more of just showing that space. We're making sure that safety is considered, making sure that the surrounding is safe. This might be when you're kind of putting some things away. You might be quietly removing an iPad if you think that might get, thrown and broken. You might be moving the water bottle that might get dumped out away. You might just be making sure that they aren't climbing on something. But we're really just kind of assessing and maintaining safety. You're going to give that calm pressure. You might, if your child is, again, one of those sensory seekers, they might be looking for you to give them a nice tight squeeze. If they don't like to be touched in the moment, you might be giving more space and just kind of, let's take those deep breaths. You're modeling the deep breaths. You're modeling a regulation strategy you guys use. One that I often use with my students was the 5-finger breathing. And so they would You just traced your finger up and down. This one was really great because you could just start doing it. And by doing it, they're seeing you. You don't have to talk through it. You don't need to narrate it. But if you practice this often, that's going to kind of trigger them to know what's happening and potentially start to breathe with you. They might not do the whole tracing of their hand, but they might start to just kind of calm down and regulate a little bit with the breathing. When we look at that emotional brain, again, that step down from the survival brain, when we kind of start to see our kids, they might start to look to you more during the hard time. That kind of indicates that they're ready to kind of listen a bit and kind of hear what you're saying. Again, this is all matched with visuals if needed. This is matched with gestures, depending on, what type of support your child needs, what type of prompt hierarchy kind of they're at. So simple phrases, keeping things really calm and comforting. You're safe. I'm here. When you're ready, take your time. We're not giving the demands again. We're not trying to prompt them to do something. We might say something like, take a drink of water. But also noting that for a lot of our kids too, and for a lot of us as adults, when people tell you like, I just need you to calm down, that can work us back up. And so it's almost like the new calm down is saying like, take deep breaths or count to 5. So knowing what your child prefers in the moment is really helpful. We're using a softer voice, lower volume, slow pace. That also is just something that our brains interpret as being safe and not being a threat. When we start to become, more sharp in our tone, our brain is automatically going to interpret that as being a threat. And so we're going to see those behaviors go back up again. So we're really trying to stay nice and calm, very kind of steady with our tone. And again, limiting the demands, just being comforting. We might, again, use the visuals. Bathroom might bring in a choice board if they have that. You might just offer the choices to them visually, take a drink of water or use a tissue. And then we're just kind of pausing and waiting again and just kind of modeling that regulation. And this is a good time, again, when we're kind of bringing back that modeling of what we would do with the feelings, where we were doing self-talk. Now we're kind of helping them name their feelings. Oh, you seem frustrated. I can tell you're upset. You look very agitated or anxious, validating those feelings, and then offering that co-regulation together. And then hopefully when we do all these things, we kind of get our child back to that thinking brain. And this is when we can take that time to teach and reflect and change the behavior, or just kind of talk through what would you do instead. It's really important to note that this doesn't always have to happen immediately after. This could happen the next day. This could be something that you kind of go back to with a social story, or you just remember to kind of go back to, the next day when you're talking about, oh, we had a hard time going to the grocery store, yesterday. We're going to go to the grocery store today, and we can't take home, the chips that you want to take home. And so again, just always assuming competence with our kids and knowing that they definitely understand and receive language and those things more than we might think they do interpret when we're kind of trying to teach these skills. An important thing to note here too is that meltdowns are very different than tantrums, right? Meltdowns are when we have that overwhelmed nervous system. Our child has like kind of lost the control to regulate. It's very much now the brain, that survival state, is driving their reactions and their behaviors. And sometimes we lose that awareness of our surroundings. We lose the ability to process language. So it's very important that we are very mindful of those things when we're trying to address the behavior. In these moments, again, these are probably the bigger behaviors we're thinking about when we come to things like this, but we really want to think about reducing that sensory input. So if you're able to, dimming the lights, reducing the noise, moving to a quieter space. Obviously, this is easier said than done when you're in like your home or maybe a friend's house, but when we're out in community settings, it's a bit more difficult to kind of reduce the sensory input. So that might be when you have to maybe kind of just move back to the car, or, just kind of being like, here, where we're at, we just need to address this. You might not have a lot of control over the sensory input, but doing your best to try to assess those things. We're staying close and saying less. Again, definitely when we're in the community setting, you might want to stay closer to your child. When you're at home, you might give more space, just depending on where you are. Thinking about the safety of your child, what they need in the moment. what is around them. And then again, waiting it out, just being there, offering the support, offering a couple different prompts here and there, but definitely just knowing that this is kind of a cycle and you have to kind of ride it out a little bit. Again, same thing. And like I said earlier, it's a bit redundant because it really is the same formula. In the moment of challenging behaviors, we're using soft, lower speech, slow speech with clear, concise language that we know our child understands, which again goes back to that proactive, preventative piece that we want to make sure we are saying these things when they're calm so they understand what it means when I say, let's breathe together, or I'm here with you. Having a very open posture, which number one makes you more aware of what's happening. You can react better. You have a closed arms. It comes off as more of a threatening kind of pose and posture. So we just want to make sure, hands can stay kind of down crossed by your legs. If you need to kind of, use a hand to protect yourself from coming objects or a body part from your child. But really, we don't want to be overwhelming. We're not trying to escalate things by putting our hands on kids. We are just kind of being open and allowing for them to have their space. Reducing eye contact. So a lot of times a direct gaze can feel super threatening. Again, this is something that is just like inherently human. It can just feel, our brain interprets that as being something that is a threat. So, we don't have to constantly make eye contact. We're not watching our child like a hawk when they are having a rough moment. We're not avoiding eye contact. So if they're seeking you to connect, we definitely want to give that to them. But just kind of keep that in mind that sometimes the why are you looking at me, can be threatening. And then again, that simple language. So some do's and don'ts. Obviously, again, stay regulated, validate the emotions. Just remember that we can validate the emotions, we can validate their feelings and their thoughts without validating the behavior, without saying, it was wrong to hit. We can say, I understand you're upset and angry. Offering that space when needed, again, using your better judgment to know when is it time to provide more space and step back, or when do you need to kind of step in and maybe guide them somewhere that is a safer space. Using the visual supports, focusing on safety. What we're not going to do is we're not going to threaten with consequences, because threatening consequences, again, the language, we're not able to understand and process that in the moment. We are not going to ask a bunch of why questions. It's almost on us to be the detectives to interpret why we think this is happening. You can always come back later to it. And if your child is a verbal processor, talking with them through those things. But in the moment, we're not going to do that. We're not going to be lecturing, like, I told you to put your shoes on, why aren't you doing this? We're not going to force the eye contact, and we're certainly not going to take that behavior personally. Because remember, our child is having a difficult time. They're not trying to be difficult for us. And as we know, parents or caregivers, relationships matter the most. So when our child feels safe and they trust us and they have that connection, we will see that it is easier to help mitigate those behaviors in the moment. And then so we talked about what happens in the moment, we talked about what happens before those moments, but that kind of long-term, what are we doing to address the behaviors to try to modify and change some of those less or more challenging behaviors? We're going to kind of think about, for us, what are those long-term things? What can we do in the future? If we're seeing that leaving the playground is super hard, and that tends to lead to some big meltdown behaviors or some significant challenges, you might then start to teach different routines with the playground. You might start to do more preventative strategies, you might start bringing visuals with you to the playground. You might start using timers, social stories, and those kinds of things. Again, working on building those lasting capabilities. So what are the teachable skills we can replace or put in place of the challenging behaviors we're seeing? Thinking about the preventative strategies, and then knowing it's a collaborative approach, both with you and the child, and also the providers that your child works with, which we'll talk about as well. So a big piece we kind of talked about a little bit is that teaching flexibility. Flexibility is a really hard concept to kind of teach, to learn, especially for our kids who are a bit more rigid. So this is definitely a skill you want to work on, again, when they're in that calm state. We're reinforcing these things. We're talking about how to start small. So you might work on flexibility when your child will be kind of okay with what the change is. We're going to be narrating flexibility. For example, I want a pizza, but they were closed. I'm going to be flexible. I can get pasta instead. Again, knowing that our children understand more than what we think they do. So this is a tool you can use with children of all abilities, making it playful, using games that require changing rules. A big strategy here that a lot of families use is like if you do game night with siblings or so on, like trying to navigate what it's like to be flexible in those moments when maybe a sibling isn't following the rules or, oh, I've changed the rules. This can also cause and lead to some challenging moments. So making sure that if you are going to be kind of contriving that learning opportunity, that you're prepared in the moment to help them navigate that. And then as always, celebrating those flexible moments, naming it, kind of celebrating, talking about it, really reinforcing it, pointing it out to our kiddos when they do it without noticing. Because sometimes they'll be really flexible around the things that they want. Like, for example, if they are on, a game, whether it's on the phone or app or computer, whatever, and they have to switch to the next thing or an ad comes up, they're really flexible with that. They kind of know what happens, and it's okay. Just, again, naming it, celebrating it, being very positive around their response to that. Problem solving together, again, kind of when you can, helping your child identify the concern, sharing the perspective is a big concept to teach our kiddos, is how to look at each other's point of views, kind of thinking about new ideas together, and then making a plan. Using social stories, again, we talked about this as a preventative strategy. So when I say preventative, that means, you might do it as a routine right before. Again, if you're going to the playground, we might use social stories on how to share with friends, or how to take turns on the slide, or how to leave the playground when time is all done. But you also might be using social stories as a concept for long term with some of those bigger, more challenging moments for your child. Role playing, again, we talked about this earlier. This is a strategy to use kind of, again, throughout. So using those scenarios, this could be a situation you've had happen recently, could be something that you just know comes up as being a challenging thing. Maybe you are introducing a new concept to your child. So maybe you're going to the beach this summer for the first time, or Great Wolf Lodge, and you want to role play some things that might come up in those moments or in those settings. When you do this, just making sure you're demonstrating it first, you're practicing together, you're giving feedback, but it's also staying really positive. And then, of course, partnering with your schools. So again, I'm a teacher myself. This is put on by Baltimore County. They are great at making sure that, our school teams and our families have that collaborative approach to things. So, sharing what works with your school team, letting them know that, hey, this went really well today. We're going to try to use this. Doing some regular check-ins with maybe your case manager, or your students' teachers, let them know what's coming up, documenting those successes, and then just knowing that your teachers and providers that work with your kids in the school setting are your partners in supporting your child. And to that note, making sure that we are consistent across environments. So a lot of our kiddos might go to outside therapies, ABA, PT, OT, speech. They might have school-based therapies of all the same things. And then also the way our teachers are teaching, making sure that if you are working on something, you kind of try to be as consistent across environments as you can. Obviously, again, noting that sometimes different settings provide for different situations. But if we kind of, are working on the same replacement skill for your kiddo, you want to work on that same replacement skill at home, maybe in outside ABA, maybe at school, and just making sure that everyone's kind of on the same page. And then knowing that you are not alone in this. So on the next slide, I'm going to share with you a quick QR code to connect with Baltimore County and Ramsey in her office. You can scan that to set some things up. I'll let Ramsey talk about what this is.
Yeah, thanks, Carly. And I dropped it in the chat if you don't have your phone for the QR code. Just again from the beginning slide when I reminded us that we were recording, and if you have specific information that you're either looking for resources or you just really want to ask some questions about the IEP process or what's going on with your child, you can always reach out to Family Support Services. We do have a phone number as well, but we are trying to guide folks to use the form. It really helps us. You can say, a little bit about what your question is, and that might help us gather those resources before we get back in contact with you, that kind of stuff. But anyway, that's "You are not alone" is a great message, Carly, and I thank you so much for that. And I think you're almost done. I want to. Yep.
Few more, just a quick recap, just to again revalidate that behavior is communication, and our job is to kind of look beneath the surface to understand the message, and knowing that behavior is the message, right? And we're trying to figure out what our child's trying to share with us, that we're looking at safety and connection first, and that we're going to teach in the calm, not in the chaos. And so again, a lot of us are, when we're struggling, we have those big moments with our kiddos, we're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Again, in those moments, it's really just about connecting, maintaining safety, and helping your child kind of get back to that baseline, where a lot of the work is going to come from is those preventative and reinforcement and long-term strategies. Some resources that I recommend: The Whole Brain Child, Beyond Behaviors, and Uniquely Human are all books that I think are really great, which help to understand behavior, because I think too, again, having a really solid foundation of why behavior happens will help you better address it in those moments. And remembering too, you guys are the expert. It's your child. You do know them best. You have all the tools out there, but also make sure you lean on your community, like Ramsey said. And so now we'll kind of open up to questions. Like I said, I do now advocacy work. So if you have any questions, if Ramsey's office can't help, you guys can reach out to me. My email is carly@behindbehaviors.com. We have a free Facebook group for parents to connect with other parents, ask questions, but also connect with people who are professionals in the field to ask and yield questions. But with that, I will just kind of pause. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to put in the chat box or unmute, and we'll take about 10 minutes or so.
Hello.
Hi, Leah. You muted but unmuted. Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. I wanted to ask what ideas or suggestions you have with transitioning to do homework at home.
Homework. What age? Like elementary, middle, high school?
Middle school, 12.
Ooh, middle schoolers. Also, Julie, to your point, yes, you can email these slides to you. I love middle school. Good for you. It's tough age, but you'll get through it. But I would say, number one, those routines are really, really important. So making sure that, it might be that they come home, they get a snack, and I would start with the less preferred thing first, is starting with homework to get to a more preferred thing, like TV time or screen time, whatever it is, time outside with your friends. But also, again, making sure that we are, a lot of our kids are really high masking, and so they'll mask during the day and then come home and kind of burn out. So you might want to, like, if you're going to do like a snack, or kind of offer some of that time for that regulation piece, right? So they might need to play for a bit to kind of decompress, right? But putting a time on that, time limit, that smooth transition can go from, I always have 10 minutes to play something, whatever they're going to be playing, or that decompress activity, making sure that it's not something that can kind of drag them in too much, because then you're kind of fighting against them just being like really stimulated into something. But I would say, again, routines, making sure that you kind of, and it's never too late to start a routine. When I was teaching, we were kind of always pivoting, coming back from winter break, we'd start something new. So like you might have a struggle right now, but like after spring break, that's a great time. You have a break of school or break away from school, then they come back, putting that routine in place of, hey, now after school, this is our making it a visual. It can be as, catered to whatever his needs are. It could be more visual. It could just be the words of get a snack, give him his snack choices, have that snack ready, using a timer, whether you're going to use Alexa or the phone or a kitchen timer. And then it might be that they have then time to do their homework, and you're supporting with the homework because it might be very aversive to them, that, you know, I just did 6 hours of schoolwork, I have to keep doing more. And then having something that comes after homework that is, again, pretty reinforcing and pretty preferred. So it's like, once I get through that, that's motivating me to get to the next thing.
And Carly, Leah was also the same person in the chat who said, would that first then board work for middle school? And there's another, you know, example, and it could be really the tool that you use for homework. So the first, it's first then, and I always say it's better than saying if then, because it sounds more like a ultimatum. But first you get this thing. At first is always the thing you don't really feel like doing. And so let's get through the thing you don't really feel like doing, and then visually you can see the next thing coming up is going to be cool, and the thing you do feel like doing. And again, that's a routine that just he may not trust that pattern at the beginning and have a real fit because he sees, like, if you put a picture of the iPad or something there, it's like, I just want to get to the thing I want. You know, it doesn't magically work the first time you use it, but that consistent routine of first you do this and then you can do the cool thing. So that would yeah. And the first then board, another, tying it to Leah's question about is that good for middle school, and Carly had the right answer. You can definitely make it adapt it to your child's cognitive level, their interest level, you know, whether they're reading or they just need pictures, that kind of thing. You can adjust it, but that's the basic concept. Do the thing you don't really feel like. I need more first then boards in my own life, right? Do the thing you don't really feel like doing, and then I'll unload the dishwasher, then I can have my cup of coffee in the morning. But you just put that pattern in and it helps you do the things you don't feel like doing.
Any other questions?
Okay. Oh, yep. Nope. I thought someone else unmuted. Well, Carly, thank you so much. And I hope everyone, you know, has a good rest of your Wednesday afternoon. And that you did get some things out of today's workshop. We did record it. We also are happy to send, as someone had asked, a copy of the presentation. And Carly, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to work with you and have you bring that expertise to our family. So I thank you guys all. And if that is, unless anybody wants to hop off real quick and ask a question, I think you can just hit leave and enjoy the rest of your day. Yes, and how can we? Yeah, Leah's got some questions and you can talk to her more. I see those in the chat now.
I'll say, or I can hang out here for a second, Leah. We can talk through breaks. Are you saying like breaks, like, again, related to homework or different? Give me some context. Okay, so like as like in their IEP, like the accommodations and supports. Oh, no recess and masking most of the day. So breaks are a common thing we see again in the IEP and those accommodations and supports page. Oh no. I would definitely ask the team to keep an eye on this. I would probably potentially call an IEP meeting to talk through this, because it sounds like you would, if there's no breaks happening now and they have an IEP and you're gonna ask to incorporate this, or if I have a 4 plan, you know, it can be. And a key thing here to know is that breaks, especially like this, it's not to be earned. So it's like non-contingent. So you need access to breaks, maybe during some natural transitions. Again, maybe if there's like a time in his day when there's more downtime or more independent time, building that in. But if we do see this as a support that they need, I would probably do something like a visual schedule that's across his school day for staff and for him, and then building in those breaks and working with the team to figure out when is the best time. Maybe he needs a break just before lunch, or sometimes kiddos need it just after lunch. Lunch can be really overwhelming, really, again, kind of get us a bit dysregulated. But I would definitely say to kind of, if you have an IEP or a 504, to connect with that team and talk through, again, where can you build in those breaks. I wouldn't make them longer than like 10 minutes. I would definitely do And you kind of talk through, do you need shorter ones? Do you need more longer ones, but less throughout the day? And Ramsey, I'll turn over to you for some suggestions too.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. If that is a consistent issue in middle school, it's a big that it's not uncommon, not all middle schools, but it is pretty common. You have elementary school, and the kids are just so used to that sensory break where they just woof, recess and decompress, and then middle school they kind of cut that down. It's either short or they don't have them. It's hard on all of them, but if your child has an IEP, I agree. It may be a point to request a meeting, and the section of the IEP, you're not looking to add a goal necessarily or add a service necessarily. The section of the IEP that you're there to talk about is the supplemental aids and supports for your child. And it might already be on there. And if that's true, that would also be a point to say it's already on the IEP, the breaks, but try to be specific about, when when the break might be or what, but non-contingent is important. You're not earning a break. It's always there. You can count on it being a part of his day. And I think if you're struggling with the school around that issue, it's definitely worthy of requesting a meeting to talk more about it. I agree with that. Okay. All right. Well, I don't need to be recording anymore. I'm going to stop that and stop recording. So many